Hollywood. That's gooey, bally-hooly Hollywood, where any office boy or young mechanic can be a panic with just a good-looking pan.
And any shop girl can be a top girl if she pleases a tired businessman.
Hello, Hollywood, and welcome to today's Walk of Fame ceremony. Thank you for being with us. Well, I want to give a special shout out to our fans who are watching the live video stream, courtesy of our media partner, Variety. I'm LaRon Gubler, President and CEO of the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, which presents these programs. Today we are dedicating the 2,621st star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame to the late filmmaker George Romero. Let me tell you just a little bit about George, and feel free to cheer for anything you like. Born in New York City, George Romero became interested in filmmaking at a young age when he borrowed an 8mm camera from his uncle. George began making his own short films and was arrested at age 14 after he threw a flaming dummy off the roof of a building while making Man from the Meteor. All right. After graduating from high school, he attended Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. I know we've got some people from Pittsburgh here. You can cheer for that. And while at Carnegie Mellon, he earned his bachelor's degree in art, theater, and design in 1960. George continued making shorts and also worked as a grip on Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest. After forming the commercial and industrial production company Latent Image in 1963, George cobbled together $114,000 in order to direct his first feature film, Night of the Flesh Eaters, which, as we all know, was later renamed Night of the Living Dead. And of course, it became a landmark cult film and significant social barometer that forever changed the horror genre. The movie popularized the zombie apocalypse subgenre of horror, spawning numerous imitators throughout the ensuing decades. Though decidedly cheap in production values, Night of the Living Dead nonetheless stood the test of time as an innovative cult film that attracted fans of every generation. It became George's signature work. Among George's other films are Season of the Witch, and you can cheer for the ones you like, Season of the Witch, The Crazies, Night Riders, Creepshow, Monkey Shines, An Experiment in Fear, and Two Evil Eyes. George secured his cult status with two more remarkable films, Martin and Dawn of the Dead. He later went on to write Day of the Dead, which was the ostensible conclusion of the Living Dead trilogy. George also worked in television as the creator, co-executive producer, and occasional writer of Tales from the Dark Side. And he teamed up with Stephen King for his adaptation of King's novel, The Dark Half. In 2004, George returned to familiar territory with Land of the Dead, which was a continuation of the zombie franchise. Land of the Dead ended up being one of the best-reviewed films of the summer of 2005. He continued his zombie revitalization with Diary of the Dead, and then made the sixth in the series, Survival of the Dead. Dubbed the Godfather of zombie films, George was a pivotal figure in the development of the contemporary horror film and the progenitor of the zombie apocalypse subgenre. Filmmakers who consider George as one of their influences include Frank Darabont, Guillermo del Toro, Robert Rodriguez, and Quentin Tarantino, to name just a few. Sadly, George passed away this past July 16th from a brief but aggressive battle with lung cancer. he slipped away listening to the score of The Quiet Man, one of his all-time favorite films, with his family by his side. Fortunately, though, he did know he was receiving this star, which had just been awarded him the month before. And that deserves applause. I'm sure he's watching the ceremony today. He leaves behind a filmmaking legacy that has endured and will continue to endure the test of time. Now, continuing in the celebration of his life, there will be an official memorial tribute to George presented by Prospect House Entertainment in association with Glendale Arts and Chris Rowe Management this evening at 8 p.m. at the Alex Theater in Glendale. And now, let's get on with the program. Our first speaker today grew up in the UK and began crafting his distinct visual style of directing by directing Super 8 films starring his school buddies. Moving to television, he directed the show Spaced, and later he directed the 2004 film Shaun of the Dead. And I might add, that became a sleeper box office hit. He has worked on many motion pictures, and his latest film, Baby Driver, has grossed over $220 million worldwide to date. Please welcome Edgar Wright to the stage.
Hey, everybody. It's amazing to be here with so many people from George's movies, like Greg Nicotero, Tom Savini, Russ Striner, John Russo. It's incredible. I just introduced Night of the Living Dead at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery on Saturday night, and so it's amazing to see you here, Russ. Now, it is ironic to be speaking here on Hollywood Boulevard for two reasons. Number one is that I'm not sure I would be working in Hollywood right now if it wasn't for George. A lot of people owe George a huge debt of gratitude for his inspiration, and I'm just one of many. And my future in film, as he said in the intro, it really started when I became friends with Simon Pegg, and we became friends because we were both obsessed with Dawn of the Dead and George's work. And I had been infatuated by George's work before I'd even seen any of his movies, because before I was too young to see them, but I would still read all the horror magazines like Fangoria with all the gory pictures of Tom's work and Greg's work. So I was completely obsessed with George before I'd even seen the films. And then later, on late night TV and VHS, I saw Night of the Living Dead, Martin, Dawn of the Dead, Creepshow, Day of the Dead. And then I was a real devotee. And then way later, me and Simon Pegg had this idea of making a film that took place in George's universe. So it would be like our North London response to his Pittsburgh epics. When we completed the film in 2004, we had this idea. We said we should show the film to George Romero, because it didn't really matter what any critics thought or what any other directors thought. It really was important to us that George Romero liked the movie. And so Universal got in touch with George. He watched it on holiday when he was in Florida. And one of the funny things about him watching it is he watched it alone with a Universal security guard, which I always thought was funny. Is like, well, they think that George Romero is going to pirate the movie? And even if he did, he would be the one person who it would be right for him to have some of the profits. So I thought it was very funny that they didn't trust George Romero to watch Shaun of the Dead without a security guard there. Anyway, later that night, we were in London. George called us, and I remember vividly standing in my flat, getting a call from George Romero, and he couldn't have been warmer or kinder. And he said, oh man, I had a blast. And, that was the only poster quote on the Shaun of the Dead poster is a quote from George. It just says, an absolute blast, George A. Romero on the poster for Shaun of the Dead, which meant a huge amount to me. But I always remember that phone call from George as being the day that my life changed and the universe got a little smaller. And so I remember it very fondly. And later, me and Simon did a cameo in Land of the Dead as zombies. Greg there did our makeup. And I, as you can imagine, it's quite a trip to be a George fan for such a long time, and then A, be a zombie, and be directed by George in terms of your zombie performance. And we were in a scene with this actress. Me and Simon were both zombies, and there was an actress. And he came up and gave the actress notes, and then he looked at us in our zombie makeup and said, well, you guys know what you're doing, so. Now, George had interests in film that stretched beyond the realm of horror, and you could definitely say that because of like the huge success of his zombie films, that he got pigeonholed as a horror director. Even if that is the case, and as you said in your intro, one of the reasons that his work resonates is because of this fierce intelligence and humor behind it. And his horror films, especially his zombie films, I think are the work of like a major satirist. And, they're highly vivid metaphors. And in a lot of ways, his films are better records of the years in which they were made than serious dramas at the time. I mean, watching 1968's Night of the Living Dead with an audience on Saturday night was stunning. And, to sort of, in the same year that, like, Jordan Peele's Get Out came out and did very well, you got a movie from 50 years ago with the first African-American lead in a genre film. And it's still enormously striking and impactful to this day. Now, sometimes horror films are dismissed when talking about classic cinema, which I am obviously not of that mind. But there is no denying that the seismic impact that George made and continues to make in film and TV and comics and video games and literature. George didn't invent the zombie, but Night of the Living Dead is still, to this day, one of the most influential films of all time. Because without Night of the Living Dead, there would be no Michael Jackson's Thriller. There would be no Italian zombie films. There would be no Resident Evil. There would be no 28 Days Later. There would be no Dead Rising. There would be no Plants vs. Zombies. There would be no Shaun of the Dead. There would be no The Walking Dead. And that's undeniable. The second irony about me being here is that the last time I had any contact with George was summer last year, when it was announced that he was having a star on the Walk of Fame, and I emailed him that day to ask him when the ceremony was and to tell him that I wanted to be there. And I'm going to read out, this is his actual response, and bear in mind this is a typically droll response from George, who is very funny and modest. From George Romero: so nice to hear from you. You were the first person of note to have responded to my announcement of my star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. If I had been given a date for the ceremony, I would have certainly passed it on to all who may have been amused. Once a date is determined, I will alert you and my children, who at this point seem to be the only amused parties. I fully appreciate that someday in the future, one of my kids might be walking along Zambezi Street in Los Angeles and wonder why his or her father has his name embedded beneath the dog shit. Thousands of people stepping over that same dog shit, and if they can decipher the time-crusted lettering, will ask, who the fuck is George Romero? Only you and my children will know. Thank you for knowing. Love, George. That's a real email. Now, he's obviously being way too modest and hard on himself, because as anybody here would agree, his surname itself, Romero, immediately conjures up images and themes, more than 99% of other film directors and writers out there. So it is up to us to honor George and his work for all the great movies he made and dream about all the great movies he could have made. And as per his email, we have to make sure that this star is kept sparkling clean. And this star, like his zombies, will last forever. So thank you for coming, and God bless George Romero.
Thank you, Edgar. Now, with more than 3 decades of work in the film industry, our next speaker still remembers his first days working with George Romero on Day of the Dead. Whether it is an epic buffalo hunt in Dances with Wolves, a drug overdose gone bad in Pulp Fiction, or flesh-eating undead in The Walking Dead, he has developed his love of monsters and special effects into a lifelong career. His team's work is being displayed with several of our zombies who are here today. So don't be scared, give them some applause. Please welcome award-winning special makeup effects master, who is also a director-producer on AMC's hit The Walking Dead, Greg Nicotero.
Wow. Hi, guys. Good morning, everybody. Edgar, well said. Wow. I'm honored and humbled to be here to immortalize George Romero on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. I don't think I can remember what I had for lunch yesterday, but I remember the moment that I met George Romero in a restaurant in Italy almost 40 years ago. Much like Edgar, you know, I knew who George was. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and it's the mythology about what he created. I always felt like I had a unique perspective in terms of my relationship with George, because he's a tremendously loyal guy. He created this family of people around him. You know, Russ, Jack, Tom Savini, Mike Gornick, John Harrison, Nick Mastandrea, all the Pittsburgh boys and girls, who are now men and women, that became part of George's family. And I think what happens is that family grows, that family expands, and now all of you are now part of that family. He was a man that loved movies passionately. His inspirations allowed him to change the rules to suit his style of filmmaking as he matured as a storyteller. I remember when Dawn of the Dead came out, there was no rating on the movie. He refused to release the film any differently than he had imagined it. So you'd have to stay up till 11 o'clock at night just to see a preview for Dawn of the Dead on television, because they wouldn't play it anytime before 11 p.m. because they felt that the material was a little too cagey. Out of the gate, Night of the Living Dead, one of his most terrifying films ever made, changed the roots of horror forever. This opened the doors for this guy from Pittsburgh. He didn't have to move to Los Angeles or New York. He created his film community there and employed hundreds and hundreds of people. So many of us that are here today, all of our friends from Toronto, when George moved to Toronto, you know, I think we would all probably say the exact same thing. I don't know where I would be if George didn't do what he did. There's so many of us that have been inspired by him, that have been moved by him, his loyalty, his sense of humor, everything about George. You know, I owe so much of who I am to this man who would laugh and smile and put his arm around you and just embrace everything about you. And the fact that you guys are all here today to embrace what George has given all of us is a tremendous tribute. He changed all of our lives. He made them thrilling, exciting, while tapping into his unique sense of wonder and imagination that took us on many fantastic journeys. Probably for me, who at some point before I got into special effects, movies were a hobby. You know, growing up in Pittsburgh, I never had any idea how you would segue from something that you loved into an actual career. But George made it happen. He allowed me to take this opportunity to be a part of something that I had only imagined. I was actually pre-med. If George hadn't come around, I would probably be removing real kidneys from people as opposed to the fake kidneys that I remove on a daily basis. So it's my honor to stand up here with these gentlemen and everybody who knows George and loves him and say thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Let me acknowledge the chairman of the board of the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Jeff Zaranam. Jeff? Jeff is the owner of the Hollywood Hotel and also the Hollywood Distillery. Well, our last speaker today is known for his boisterous and sometimes villainous roles. He trained as an actor at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. Throughout his 50-year career, he has been seen in A Clockwork Orange, Caligula, those deserve cheers, and is also known for his work in Cat People, Star Trek Generations, Tank Girl, the 2007 remake of Halloween, and its 2009 sequel, Halloween 2, Bolt Easy, and The Artist. He received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2012. Please welcome Malcolm McDowell.
Hello, everyone. How nice to be here with all George's friends, family. Ooh. Well, we need a sound man here in Hollywood. It's very apt, isn't it, that George's star would be outside a magic shop. And the fact is, of course, that George made magic. I never actually worked with him. I feel I'm a bit of an imposter, really, but the truth is, I knew him quite well. And we had many great dinners together, conversations about our work and various people. He loved to gossip a bit. He loved a good story and a good joke. And why I loved him, I think, is that, you know, that he stayed in Pittsburgh, you know, in the middle of the country. He made his great movies there on micro budgets. But the interesting thing about George was that these movies that he hung his hat on, as it were, the zombie movie, that told a lot about the human condition, about us. And that was his great art. He was a spectacular person, and one of the rare things in our life today, a true American gentleman. Now, I will tell, thank you. Oh, look at you all. Sorry about my arse back there. Would have worked out had I known. I'd like to tell one story about George, and this is really a Chris Rose story, but as he's not here at the microphone, I am going to take it. It involves George, of course, who is the center of this story, and a certain German, very famous German horror-ish actor, although he was not like this description. Anyway, George was at a convention and with this said actor, I won't mention his name. You probably never heard of him anyway. But he said to Chris, who of course was George's manager, I want to meet George. I mean, I should be working with George. I mean, this is ridiculous. I want to work with George. And of course, Chris is trying to keep George away from this guy the whole trip. And of course, the last day when George is getting into his car to take him to the airport, there is this German actor who comes running at George with a glass of white wine in his hand, shouts out, George, George, trips, hits George, the wine is all over him, George falls. Now, you know how tall the guy was. For George to go down was a serious thing. And one postscript was, of course, the German actor never got to work with George. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Bye.
Well, the city of Los Angeles likes to present resolutions to our honorees, and we have one that the city has made on behalf of George today, so I would like to invite his wife up to receive this on his behalf. Please welcome to the stage Suzanne DeRoche Romero. If you'd stand right here. So Suzanne, as I mentioned, this is a resolution from the city of Los Angeles signed by the head of the city council and our councilman for Hollywood, and a beautiful resolution on his life. So on behalf of the city of Los Angeles, I'm very pleased to present this to you today. We'll put that right here. And at this time, I understand you'd like to say a few words, so let me just say by final way of introduction that we are very happy to declare this George Romero Day in Hollywood.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, gentlemen, for your beautiful words. George had very many partners and collaborators throughout his whole life, and there's so many to mention, too many to mention, but there are a few that I must mention. Starting from the beginning, image 10, John Russ Reiner. Hello, thank you very much. his longtime marriage and partnership with Christine Romero. Thank you. Barry Gutterman, John and Leslie Harrison, thank you. Nick Mastandria Shue, Richard Rubenstein, Peter Grunwald, Dario Argento, David Gersh, Mike Gornick, Adam Swicka, Pat Buba, Michael Doherty, Maddie Berman. Thank you. We have also our event sponsors, Chris Rowe Management, Famous Monsters of Filmland, Texas Frightmare Weekend, and the Scarefest. Thank you all so very much. If George were here, he would be the first to point out the irony of him being given a star today, a celestial object that is firmly planted on the ground. It will be well trodden by passers-by, fans, those who loved him. He was such a life force. His light shall never be dimmed. I miss him every minute of every day. My biggest wish is that he would be here today to accept this honor. The only good thing about George's passing is my relationship with his wonderful, beautiful, talented daughter, Tina Romero. Together, we will forge ahead. Je suis George Romero. Vous êtes George Romero. Nous sommes George Romero. I also have to make a very special thank you to Chris Rowe, who worked so hard and who loved George very much. And Chris, thank you. I will treasure this day for the rest of my life. And I also want to say the most important thank you today is the fans. He did it all for you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And stay scared, all right? All right, thanks. Thanks very much.
So it's time to unveil the star. We'd like to ask all of our speakers to join us. And I don't usually direct zombies, but we'd like to ask our 4 zombies if they'd come up on the stage so they can also be in the photo. All right, let's do it.